You know, he was developing his network. He wasn't even on the radar. They had no investigation going. He was making millions of dollars a year. And if it wasn't for one cop named Joe Kowalski, that investigation might have not have started for another 10.
DEA quickly realized Matthews was setting up 100-kilo deals down in Venezuela with the French connection, which would have made him one of the biggest heroin dealers in the country already at that point.
He lived in Todd Hill, Staten Island, which even to this day is a very high-profile neighborhood.
Frank was the only black guy living in that neighborhood. And
so guess who two of his neighbors were in Toad Hill? And when I say neighbors, I don't mean around the corner. I mean next door and across the street. Tommy Three Fingers Lucchese, founder of the Lucchese crime family, and Big Paul Castellano, who was the underboss of the Gambinos, later went on to become the boss, and was killed by John Gotti when Gotti took over the Gambinos.
And why would Frank want to live in a neighborhood that had two of the biggest mobsters, Italian mobsters, at that time on the scene?
So we had two very angry Italian mafia chieftains looking at his lavish outdoor parties, noisy parties every night. And these La Cosa Nostra guys were bosses. And they kept very, very low profiles. And here's Matthew showing up in his usual Rolls Royce and all kinds of things going on.
The Italians were racist, you know, and they didn't like blacks, especially so-called uppity blacks like Frank Matthews, asserting themselves, let alone living in their midst.
Frank, at this time, was telling people that Carlo Gambino, the head of the Gambino family, the head of the Mafia Commission, had told Paul Castellano to give the DEA information about the license plates of all the cars that were coming to Frank's house. And somebody was giving anonymous information.
In fact, the intelligence was pouring in surreptitiously from somebody on that street, giving the DEA guys license plate data of every license plate that showed up at Matthew's house.
And Frank said he put the police on the boss of boss. That was Frank.
We did not know who really turned that in. I think maybe the agents knew, but I certainly did. He knew after they bought the house it wasn't the place he should be. He was the only black fellow living on that street.
Some of the boys from the mob visited him and suggested that he was out of his water. And they also suggested he shouldn't have $1 million house in Toad Hill and Staten Island.
Police really started to get a sense of what was going on, the scope of Frank's operation, and they raided an apartment that probably belonged to his lieutenant, Mickey Beckwith, in Brooklyn. They nicknamed it the Ponderosa. The Ponderosa is where they would process the heroin.
A black male wanted to purchase, I think, a 55-gallon drum of mannitol, which is a cutting aid. That's when his name first came to my attention.
So a federal team was formed consisting of DEA, IRS, and federal prosecutors to go after
Matthews.
You know, I think the mob is overrated. And I knew some heavyweights in the mob. Did time with them, saw them on the streets, did business with them. I know of deals that were put together that they couldn't even come up with the money that they were supposed to come up with to handle this. They controlled the docks and stuff like that, so they had ends and they were always pinching pennies, what I call it, you know. But then there came a time when they weren't needed.
For a long period of time, DEA spent a lot of time picking off various members of the Gambino.
There was already rumblings. The mob was mad at him because he had did an end around on them to get his heroin from the French connection. So he's selling drugs to all the big black dealers. That's cutting into the mafia's profits. And now he moved on the same block with them, and they didn't like it.
Castellano and certainly Three Fingers Brown would have wanted him killed.
The feds overheard on wiretaps, mafia members talking about having Frank killed because of his entry into the heroin business and living on Toad Hill.
Where he warned the Italians. He said, touch one of my men and I'll drive down Mulberry Street and I'll kill every wop I see.
So you can see it, even they respected what, before this time, he would have been gone.
It just showed the personality of Frank. Frank really didn't give a shit. I mean, he was fearless, and he wasn't going to let a bunch of what at the time in the black gangster community, or Dagos to refer to Italians, they weren't letting any Dagos or Guineas tell him what to do.
Just picture the mob. They got all these men, soldiers behind them, but they couldn't even touch Frank and money. Frank had more money than the mob. But, they was jealous. If a black dude lived next door comes on.
His goal was to unite and form a family where they cut out the Italian mafia.
Mafia. In the 1960s, there became a huge demand for drugs in this country. That gave rise to a new kind of organized crime, what I call drug kingpins or drug lords.
When Frank arrived in New York, probably in 66 or 67, the city and the whole country was really going crazy.
When you think about New York City in the 70s, you looked over your shoulder 3 or 4 times before you got to the train station or your car. I mean, it was a gangster town. Nobody wanted to go to New York City. The politicians made a lot of noise. The media focused on that, which forced law enforcement to go after those guys that were dealing heroin. And Frank Matthews at that time, I think, was probably under 30 years old, was extremely bright, had good leadership skills, and had convened a meeting of all of the top African American and Hispanic drug dealers in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1971.
I assumed it just meant that he had finally gotten confident that he had locked in his contacts with the French connection down in Venezuela, and he was really ready to roll.
And his goal was to unite and form a family where they cut out the Italian mafia and went right to the source of heroin and brought it in and controlled the distribution.
Miami, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, similar information was coming back. Some guy named Matthews was behind the local organizations in those cities.
And he had been identified as one of the largest, if not the largest, heroin trafficker in the United States.
There's been a lot of recent movies on Lucas being the king of drugs. That's not true. And Matthews was the #1 heroin pioneer.
Nicky Bonds and all them, they wasn't nothing. They couldn't touch Frank. I don't know why they built him up like that. Nicky Bonds was supplying New York. Frank was supplying about 25 states.
In my opinion, Frank Matthews was a much larger drug dealer than Frank Lucas.
So here you have a black guy meeting a Cuban through a Puerto Rican to get heroin from French gangsters. The United Nations of crime.
Black power was for equality for African Americans. Black gangsters are committing illegal crimes. They're destroying the community, okay? So,
even though the U.S. economy was booming in the late 60s, the inner cities were dying. Just as the black population started coming up to the north in mass, industrial jobs started declining. By the early 60s, heroin is getting popular in places like Harlem, Baltimore, Detroit.
And then around 1964, 65, it was really growing, it was booming. Like,
a river of money is flowing because business is so good.
Put this together with the big pool of unemployed black males that are on the streets of the cities, and you have the birth of a new industry. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people standing on the corner selling drugs. And that's the world that Frank Matthews took over.
We had indicted Frank, and our indictment included about 20 foreign defendants, and including some Venezuelan customs agents, and Jules Serini, the courier who came from Marseille with 22 kilos of heroin. Serini had been told that the bribes were paid and he'd have no trouble coming into Caracas with his suitcases. He was in fact arrested with 22 kilos and 100% pure heroin. Matthews paid cash for it, and they would have had backed up 22 kilos every month if they got away with it.
Now, whether Frank planned to leave or not at first is doubtful. He was going to court for 6 months. Big Head Brother in Baltimore was part of the case.
He had to show up weekly at the federal courthouse.
He was going to court. He was going to court on the case with Big Head now.
And Frank was showing up for court. But one day at the courthouse, he bumps into one of the federal prosecutors, I think, involved in the case. And the prosecutor tells him that there's another indictment that's gonna come down on Frank that carries life.
In 1973, Frank made his last appearance in the Eastern District of New York in front of Judge Ray Deary.
One day as he arrived, Chief of Criminal Division Ray Deary, now a federal judge, Matthews said to him as Deary was going out for lunch, Mr. Deary, am I going to get that life count I keep hearing about? Welcome. He said, you may, Frank. It's very possible.
His clock came in when the lawyer told him, "You not getting out on bail. They gonna keep you gonna face a life sentence of 848."
We were prepared to bring the life count in a superseding indictment. We were getting ready to do that.
The marshals and them, they know that he ain't know about that indictment. They were gonna surprise him when he go to court.
After the Deary incident, he fled that night, and the last person to see him in Brooklyn was Detective Mike Bramble, who spotted him blasting through a red light in his car. Bramble gave chase and he lost him.
But the last time that they saw him in New York, he came through there with bags of money, they say, and just he wasn't even trying to win. He just wanted to leave some money and leave his mark.
Our office was alerted that he had jumped bond. A warrant had been issued for his arrest. I did learn through my investigation that Frank Matthews had a safety deposit box at a First Union National Bank on Main Street in Durham, North Carolina. And I went to that First Union Bank where I knew he had a safety deposit box. I walked in the front door of the bank and asked them if they had seen Frank Matthews, and they said he just went out the back door. So I ran out the back door of the bank, and I did see a car leaving the parking lot, and he was there obviously cleaning out the safe deposit box to make a run.
I want to think he's alive. A lot of them officers that arrest people and this and that and everything like that probably help them get the hell out of the country. I wouldn't be surprised. He's probably down on the coast of Del Sard in Spring. Nobody would pay him any attention.
Where he is today, God only knows. I'll tell this, his body never turned up. Cheryl Brown's body never turned up. No bones were ever located. It's very, very unusual in cold case homicide cases where a body never turns up. He's covered his path very well.
If he died of natural causes or in a car accident or something to that effect, his fingerprints would have eventually gone into a coroner's database and it would have been matched up, and then we could have proven either through autopsy or death certificate.
There have been many informants, both LCN, La Cosa Nostra types that supposedly, killed him or had him eliminated because he was a threat to La Cosa Nostra. He was well known as a drug dealer, and he was held in $5 million bail.
If the Guinness hit Frank, they wouldn't have knew about it because they snitched so much. Them Guinness told on John Gotti. That would have came out. And Frank wasn't even dealing with the fucking Guinea. All that matters, somebody said, oh yeah, he got a Guinea connection. But Frank wasn't dealing with them.
We never had a solid lead on Frank Matthews. We felt like he had disappeared off the face of the earth.
So he had $15 million and 6 months head start.
The way he lost himself was he cut all ties with everybody he knew.
He done like that.
I mean, people speculate, plastic surgery.
All of the agents who work on the case to this day believe he's still alive.
I don't see how he could be alive.
He's alive, and that's it.